Right after I paid their $212,000 mortgage, I got an anonymous video. Watch this now. I opened it and saw my new wife and her mom selling the same house to someone else. He thinks it's his. $50,000 extra, and it's yours. They laughed. I sent the video to the family group chat, canceled their payment, and arrived with the deed. But the real shock was waiting inside. My hands were still dirty from the field when I opened that video. I mean that literally. I had tractor grease on my left thumb and dried clay on 3 fingers of my right hand. And I remember staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My wife, my mother-in-law, standing in the kitchen of the house I had just finished paying $212,000 for 3 days ago. 3 days. And they were on a recorded phone call with someone, and my mother-in-law was laughing that specific laugh she has, the one I always thought meant she was happy to see me, and she was saying, "He thinks it's his. You offer $50,000 on top, and the house is yours. He won't even know until the paperwork clears." And then my wife left too. I sat in my truck cab for 4 minutes and 40 seconds. I know the exact number because I checked my phone when I finally put it down. 4 minutes and 40 seconds of just sitting there with the video frozen on the last frame. Danny's face, mid-laugh, blurry from the recording, but clear enough. And the only sound was my 2 border collies outside the truck, scratching at the door, wanting their dinner. I got out. I fed the dogs. I went inside and I made myself a cup of coffee. And then I started making some phone calls. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because if I just tell you what happened next, without telling you how we got here, you are going to think I overreacted. And I want you to understand very clearly, with full context, that I did not overreact. If anything, what I did next was possibly the most proportionate thing one calm, reasonable, grease-handed Kentucky farmer has ever done in the history of Mercer County real estate. Let me take you back, because you need the full picture. My name is Andy Henderson. I'm 34 years old, and I have farmed 280 acres of Mercer County, Kentucky land since I was 21 years old, which is when my dad handed me the keys and said, more or less, "Try not to break what I built." I haven't. In fact, I've added 60 acres, a new equipment shed, a grain storage system that my neighbor Earl still refers to as the Taj Mahal of corn silos, with a level of resentment that tells me he means it as a compliment. I run soybeans and corn as my main crops. I've got 22 head of cattle, and in a good year, and most years have been pretty good, I clear somewhere between $82,000 and $91,000 after expenses. I know what some of you are thinking. That's farming money, not house buying money. You'd be wrong. Farming money, when you don't have a car payment, when you own your land outright because your father owned it outright, when your expenses are equipment and seed and fuel, and you've been doing this since you were 15 years old, farming money goes a long way. I have never in my life made a payment I couldn't cover. My credit score last time I checked was 791. I drive a 2019 F250 that I own free and clear. I do not have subscriptions to things. I am, financially speaking, one of the most boring people you will ever meet, which is how I ended up with $212,000 available to spend on the house. I want to be honest with you about something. I am not a man who talks a lot. I think that is important for you to understand before this story goes any further. I talk to my dogs. I talk to Earl. I talk to my brother Marcus when Marcus isn't being impossible, which is about 60% of the time. But I have never been the kind of person who says out loud what's sitting in his chest. Not because I don't feel things, but because I was raised in a family where you showed people what you meant by what you did, not by what you said. This, as it turns out, is a character trait that certain kinds of people find very useful for their own purposes. I met Danny, at a county fair in Harrodsburg in the summer of 2 years ago. She was there with a girlfriend, visiting from Louisville, and she was the kind of beautiful that makes you temporarily stupid. Dark hair, this laugh that could light up a grain silo. And she told me within the first 10 minutes that she'd grown up in the city and had always been so curious about farm life. She said the word curious like it was expensive. I thought it was charming. Danny was 31. She worked remotely doing social media consulting. managing Instagram accounts for small businesses, building content calendars, that kind of work. She made about $28,000 a year doing it, which in Louisville didn't stretch very far. She had a studio apartment, a car with 3 more years of payments, and a mother named Linda who had very strong opinions about everything. Linda, I need you to understand Linda. Linda Marsh was 58 years old, 5'4", and operated with the energy of someone who had watched every season of every real estate show ever made and had concluded that she, personally, was the world's foremost authority on property values, interior design, investment strategy, and the general business of other people's lives. She had never held a real estate license. She had never completed a real estate course. She had, however, been present at 4 property sales in her extended family over the past decade, which she spoke about as though she had brokered each one with the precision of a seasoned Wall Street negotiator. Linda had shoulder-length blonde hair that she highlighted every 6 weeks, and she wore always a thin gold necklace with a little house pendant. I found this detail charming at first. Later, I would find it almost unbearably on the nose. She called me on from our second meeting forward. She asked about my little farm in the same tone of voice you might use to ask a child about their finger painting. I thought she was harmless. I want you to understand that I genuinely thought she was harmless. Danny and I dated for 6 months before I proposed. I know that sounds fast. Looking back, I understand that it was fast. At the time, I was 33 years old, and I had spent most of my adult life eating dinner alone in a farmhouse that smelled like diesel fuel and good Kentucky soil, and I was ready, genuinely ready, to share my life with someone. Danny seemed like she was ready too. She'd come out on weekends. She'd sit on the porch and watch the field and say things like, "I could get used to this," and "There's something so peaceful about the land." She seemed, as best I could tell, like a person who meant what she said. The wedding cost $34,000. I paid for all of it because Danny didn't have savings and Linda had already spent what she'd set aside on a condo renovation in Louisville that she described as an investment. The wedding was held at a venue in Lexington. Danny's choice, beautiful place, honestly beautiful, and it was a good day. I remember it as a good day. We settled into the farmhouse, mine, the one I'd lived in alone for 11 years. It's a solid house, 3 bedrooms, good bones, a porch that wraps around 2 sides, an oak tree in the yard that's been there since before my grandfather broke the ground. I love that house the way you love something that has always been there, the way you don't notice it until you try to imagine the land without it. Danny noticed it, just not the way I'd hoped. Within about 3 weeks of moving in, the comments started. Not complaining, exactly. More like a steady drip of quiet observations, delivered in a tone so casual you had to pay attention to realize they added up to something. "The kitchen is a little cramped, isn't it?" said while unloading groceries that I'd driven 30 minutes to buy because she didn't want to make the trip. "It must be weird for you not having neighbors nearby," said on a Thursday evening when the quiet that I loved, the quiet I've lived in and worked in for over a decade, apparently began to feel like pressure to her. "Louisville has this restaurant, you'd love it. We should drive up sometime just for the weekend," which became, gradually every other weekend, then most weekends, until I started to notice that my wife spent more time in Louisville than on the farm where we lived. I didn't say anything. That's the part I want you to sit with for a second. I just kept going. I kept farming, kept working, kept paying the bills, which now included Danny's credit card because she'd stopped paying it herself around month 2 of our marriage, and I'd covered it without being asked, because that's what you do. I thought, when you're the person who earns more, I covered her car payment, $487 a month, 14 months in a row. I gave Linda 3 loans, one for $4,000, one for $6,800, one for $6,600, every one of which she promised to pay back, and none of which she ever mentioned again. I paid for a girls' trip that Danny took to Savannah, Georgia with Linda and 2 friends because she said she needed a mental health break from what she called the isolation. The isolation was my farm, my home, my life. And I kept telling myself it was temporary. I kept thinking, She just needs time to adjust. This is a big transition. She grew up in a city. The land takes getting used to. The quiet takes getting used to. She'll find her footing. Give her space, give her time, and she'll find her footing. I think the thing nobody tells you when you're a generous person is that if you always say yes, if you cover every bill and swallow every complaint and drive every extra mile and absorb every quiet little signal that what you have isn't enough, people stop seeing it as generosity. It stops being a gift. It becomes a baseline. It becomes the floor. And once something is the floor, it's invisible. And the only thing people notice is when the floor feels lower than they expected. I was not aware for a long time that I had become someone's floor. About 8 months into our marriage, Danny came to me with an idea. She explained, found a property, a house, 3 bedrooms, a nice yard, a covered porch, located about 1.25 miles from my farm, on a county road I've driven probably 10,000 times in my life. It had just come on the market. The asking price was $235,000, but she thought we could get it for $212,000. She thought we should buy it as our home, not the farmhouse? I asked. She smiled at me. That specific Danny smile that I now recognize as the smile she uses when she's already decided something and is waiting for you to catch up. The farmhouse is your space, she said. I think we both know it's always going to feel like your space. This could be ours. I want you to notice what she did there. She didn't criticize the farmhouse. She made it sound like this was about us, about giving me something, about creating shared space between 2 people who each had their own history. It was gracious, it was considerate, it was, I understand now, a construction. But here's the thing. The house was genuinely nice, and it was right there, a mile down the road. And I thought, maybe she's right. Maybe having a space that's hers, that's ours, would help her feel more settled here, more rooted in the county, more present on the land she'd been treating like a stopover on the way to somewhere else. I thought buying that house might be the thing that made her want to stay. I bought the house, $212,000, paid in full, because I had the money and because mortgages give me the same feeling that standing on someone else's land gives me. Like something is pulling at me that I can't see. I did not take a mortgage. I wrote the check. The deed had both our names on it, and I handed Danny the keys in the driveway of that house on a Tuesday in October, and she kissed me, and she said, "This is the beginning of something good." She was not wrong. It was the beginning of something. She just meant something different by it than I did. The house was 3 days paid off when I got the anonymous text message. No name, no number I recognized, just 4 words and a link. Watch this now. And I watched it. And I saw my wife and my mother-in-law standing in the kitchen of the house I had just handed them the keys to on a phone call with a voice I didn't recognize. And Linda said, "He thinks it's his. You offer $50,000 on top, and the house is yours. He won't even know until the paperwork clears." And then both of them laughed. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment because I think it matters. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel the hot, sharp kind of anger that makes you want to shout or throw something. What I felt was more like the moment in the winter when a frozen pond that you've been walking on slowly every day finally makes a sound beneath you. A low, deep crack. And you realize that what you thought was solid was never quite as solid as you needed it to be. You don't run. You don't panic. You get very still. And you think, okay, now I know. I fed the dogs. I made coffee. And then I made 3 phone calls, sent 2 emails, and opened my banking app. The recurring transfer to Danny's account, $1,847 a month, which I had been sending since month 4 of our marriage, took 2 taps to cancel. I pressed cancel, and then I pressed confirm, and I put my phone face down on the kitchen table and finished my coffee. Something had shifted inside me. Not dramatically, just permanently. Okay, so here's the part of the story where I need you to understand something about me. I am a farmer. I have been a farmer since I was 15 years old. And farming, real farming, the kind where your living comes out of the ground and your decisions are made in 4-year arcs and your mistakes cost you a season, and your patience is not a virtue, but an actual survival mechanism. Farming teaches you something that I think most people don't know. It teaches you that the most powerful thing you can do is not react. It's prepare. You don't fight the weather. You don't argue with a drought. You read the conditions, you make a plan, and you act in a way that 6 months from now puts you on the right side of the outcome. I want to be very clear that what I did next was calm and reasonable, scaled to the situation. The situation, as I understood it, was this. My wife and her mother had decided that the house I bought, the house in my county, on the county road I've driven 10,000 times, 1.25 miles from my own farm, was, in their estimation, an asset to be liquidated. Danny did not want to live on the land. She never did. The house was not a home. It was a move, a financial extraction, dressed up as a fresh start, designed to be completed before I had time to understand what I was looking at. They wanted to sell it as a residential property for $262,000, $50,000 more than I paid, to a buyer they'd already found. Now here's what I want you to understand. I have 280 acres of functioning farmland. I have equipment, I have livestock, I have grain storage. I have relationships with the Mercer County Agricultural Board that go back over a decade. I have a farmer's understanding of land use, zoning designations, and county registration processes. And I had a 2-acre property 1 mile down the road that needed to be managed. I called Earl at 6:43 in the morning. Earl Combs is 62 years old and has worked on my farm, off and on, for 19 years. He is the kind of man who once spent 4 hours tracking down a single escaped chicken through a neighboring cornfield, not because it was worth the time, but because he had decided that was going to be the outcome. He is relentless in the way that only people who have spent decades coaxing harvests from difficult soil can be. I told Earl what had happened. There was a long pause on the phone. "So," he said finally, "what do you need?" It wasn't a question. That's the thing about Earl. He doesn't ask questions when he already understands the shape of the situation. I told him what I needed. There was another pause, and then he said, "I'm going to need to make a few calls. And I'm going to need the good plowing rig." "Take it," I said. "And Andy," he said, "I need you to know that I have been waiting 3 years for an excuse to do something like this. And I cannot tell you how glad I am that you're the one giving it to me." I drove down to the county seat in Harrodsburg the following morning and filed paperwork with the Mercer County Agricultural Board to register the 2-acre parcel adjacent to the house, the lawn, the back garden, the side strip of land that ran along the fence line, as an agricultural annex to the Henderson Farm operation, farm parcel number 4 of the Henderson Farm, Mercer County, Kentucky. I submitted a USDA agricultural use designation application. I had brought the deed with me because my name was on the deed, and everything I was doing was completely, thoroughly, agonizingly legal. The woman at the County Agricultural Board, her name was Peggy. She had worked there for 31 years. She had a small potted succulent on her desk that she clearly loved very much. Looked at my paperwork, looked at me, looked at my paperwork again. "This is the Caldwell Road property?" she asked. "The little farmhouse with the blue shutters?" "Yes, ma'am." "Somebody bought that for $212 last week," she said, without looking up. "Yes, ma'am," I said. That was me. She looked at me for a long moment. "And now you want to run agricultural operations on the associated land parcel." "I have livestock that need space," I said. "The south field is getting overcrowded." Peggy nodded very slowly. "Mm-hmm," she said, and she stamped my paperwork. Now, the thing about an agricultural land designation in Mercer County, Kentucky, is that once it's in place, the property cannot be sold as a standard residential listing. It has to go through a rezoning process, a county review, public notice period, a hearing that takes at minimum 4 to 6 months. I knew this. I knew this the way I know when the soil is ready to turn and when it isn't, which is to say, I knew it in my bones before I could have told you the regulation number. Danny and Linda's buyer, whoever they'd found, whoever was supposed to show up with a cashier's check for $262,000, was going to arrive at a property that as of Wednesday morning was legally, officially, and irreversibly a component of an active Kentucky farming operation. But that's not the funny part yet. The funny part is what Earl did Wednesday afternoon. I want to tell you that I gave Earl very specific instructions. I want to tell you I had a clear plan with defined parameters. I want to tell you that everything that happened next was the result of careful, deliberate execution. Some of it was, I told Earl, get the field plow till the front half acre, plant winter wheat. Put the Henderson Farm South Annex sign up at the road. Earl had made it himself. Wood router, painted it, 2 stakes, perfect, I still have it. And move 4 of the goats and 6 of the chickens to the enclosure I had delivered by 7 a.m. I had rented a portable livestock fence the night before. 1 call. They delivered at dawn, no questions. Earl had the whole thing set up by noon. What I did not instruct Earl to do was bring Rosie. Rosie is a pig. She's a 190-pound Berkshire sow who has lived on my farm for 3 years and who I had not, technically, included in the livestock plan for the South Annex. Rosie, however, has very strong opinions about where she wants to be at any given time. And on Wednesday afternoon, Rosie apparently decided that the South Annex was her calling. She followed Earl's truck down the county road. She does this sometimes. She follows the truck. Nobody knows why. It is simply one of her qualities. And by the time Earl arrived at the property, Rosie had arrived first. And Rosie had found the front porch. The front porch of the house, the covered porch with the hanging basket and the little bench Danny had put out there the first week we owned it. Specifically because she thought it looked inviting in photos, became, by noon on Wednesday, Rosie's preferred location. She sat there. Earl said he tried twice to move her. Rosie did not move. Earl put out water for her and accepted the situation. By the time the buyer arrived for her showing on Thursday afternoon, the Henderson Farm South Annex looked like this. The front half acre, freshly plowed dark soil, rows of winter wheat seedlings in the early Kentucky November light, dusted with the particular red-gray clay of Mercer County. The entrance, a 6-foot-tall wooden sign reading Henderson Farm, South Annex, Est, 2024, staked between 2 river rocks I'd pulled from the creek 2 summers ago. The left side of the property, a portable livestock fence enclosure containing 4 pygmy goats, Beulah, Jim, Karen, and the one we call Superintendent because of how he looks at you, and approximately 43 chickens. I say approximately 43 because by that morning, 3 more had wandered over from the main farm, and I had not pursued them. The right side, a regulation chicken coop, permitted, constructed, standing. The front porch, Rosie, Earl, sitting in a folding lawn chair at the foot of the driveway, in a Henderson Farm t-shirt I'd had made 3 years ago for a county fair booth, drinking sweet tea from a mason jar, with the specific posture of a man who has been sitting in that chair for 40 years and intends to be there for 40 more. The buyer's name was Bethany Marsh, 29 years old, Danny's first cousin. She arrived in a silver Honda Civic with a woman named Carolyn, who turned out to be a real estate agent who was not, technically, licensed in Mercer County, but who had been brought in by Linda to facilitate the transaction, which is a word people use when they mean something they can't say plainly. I know all of this because Bethany told me herself later. She told me everything later. But that comes after the part where Earl looked up at Bethany and Carolyn pulling into the driveway and said, with complete serene sincerity, "Welcome to the Henderson South Annex. You hear about the grain storage consultation?" Bethany said. "I'm sorry, what?" Earl said, "Grain storage. We're running a consultation this week on expansion capacity. You can wait inside if you want, but I'd knock first." Rosie's on the porch and she startles. Bethany looked at the porch. Rosie looked at Bethany. Carolyn, who had driven from Louisville for this, made a sound that Bethany later described to me as like a tire losing air. Bethany got back in her car and called Danny. She put it on speaker. Bethany told me she could hear in the background of Danny's voice the specific tone of someone who is realizing in real time that a plan they thought was seamless has developed what might be called a significant structural flaw. "What do you mean there's a pig on the porch?" Danny said. "There's a pig on the porch," Bethany said. "And goats. and a man in a Henderson Farm shirt who is asking about grain storage. And there's a sign, Danny. A really big sign. It says South Annex. The call was quiet for 3 seconds. I'll call you back. Danny did not call Bethany back. Danny called me instead, 14 times in 4 hours. I answered on the 15th call, not because I had been waiting to answer. I was genuinely checking on the winter wheat, but because I had things to say and I had decided what they were. I told her the property had been registered as farm parcel number 4 of the Henderson Farm operation with the Mercer County Agricultural Board, and that any attempt to sell it as a residential property would require a county rezoning process of 4 to 6 months minimum, and that I had the deed and that my name was on the deed. I told her I had sent the video to the family group chat at 6 a.m. that morning, all 12 members. I told her she should probably talk to someone about what came next. And then I said, I genuinely wish you well, Danny, and I hung up. I genuinely did not plan for what happened after that. I want to tell you about what happened to the fallout, because I think it is important for you to understand that once a thing of this nature enters the world, it does not stay where you put it. The family group chat, which included both my family and Danny's side, because we merged them at the wedding the way families do, optimistically, had seen the video before most people were awake. The first response came at 6:22 a.m. from my Aunt Carol, who lives in Lawrenceburg and who communicates exclusively in capital letters. Andy, I am praying for you this morning. The second response at 6:29 was from Danny's Aunt Renata, who I had always assumed to be a reasonable woman. This is clearly taken out of context. Danny would never. The third response was from my brother Marcus. It said, there is no context in which that sentence has a different meaning, Renata. I watched it 4 times. After that, the chat went fully nonlinear, and I stopped reading it. Linda, by 9 a.m., had posted on her personal Facebook page, some people don't understand the value of family or the concept of investment. You know who you are. God sees everything. She used 3 praying hands emojis. 14 people liked it. One of those people was me, because I have a Facebook account, and I noticed the post, and I pressed the button before I fully processed what I was doing, and by the time I realized I'd liked it, it seemed wrong to unlike it, so I left it. Linda noticed. She called me. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail that was 4 minutes and 22 seconds long, and which began with the word Andrew, said in a specific octave that I believe has never been used for any other purpose in human history. Carolyn, the real estate facilitator from Louisville, had driven back up the county road and been unable to get past Earl, who was still in his lawn chair and who had, by that point, acquired a thermos. She had posted in a local Lexington real estate Facebook group, a group called Central KY Real Estate Professionals and Friends, which has 4,000 members, the following message. Has anyone else ever shown up to a residential property listing and discovered it had been converted into a working farm between the listing date and the showing? Asking for a client. This is not the drill. By noon, the post had 214 comments. By 5 p.m., it had 847. The top comment, with 642 reactions, was from a woman named Darlene, who had no connection to anyone in this story, and who wrote, "Honey, I need the full story. Is the pig still on the porch?" Earl, it should be noted, had taken a photo of Rosie on the porch at 11 a.m. and sent it to me with the caption, "She's settled in." I forwarded it to Darlene in the comments. Darlene posted it. The photo received 912 reactions and was shared 137 times, including to a subreddit called R Pro Revenge, where it reached the front page and generated a thread of approximately 4,000 comments, many of which were detailed legal analyses of Kentucky agricultural designation law, written by people who are clearly not Kentucky agricultural lawyers, but who were very enthusiastic about it. Someone made a TikTok. The TikTok was a slideshow. Photo of the sign, photo of the plowed front yard, photo of the goat enclosure, photo of Earl in his chair, photo of Rosie on the porch. The text on screen read, Kentucky farmer buys wife a house. Wife tries to sell it. Husband converts it into a USDA designated farm annex overnight. Rosie the pig was not part of the plan. The TikTok has, as of me telling you this story, 4.8 million views. Earl's photo is the thumbnail. Earl is in his corner of central Kentucky, something approaching a local legend. The feed store in Harrodsburg printed out the TikTok screenshot and taped it to the front door. It's still there, but the part that I genuinely, honestly, with my whole heart did not plan for was the goat. The goat's name is Jim. Jim is the most independent of my pygmy goats and has a history of finding ways through or over or occasionally under fences that I have never been able to fully account for. Jim found his way through the portable livestock fence on Thursday afternoon. I don't know when exactly because Earl had gone home for dinner. And Jim found the front door of the house, which had been left unlocked. And Jim went inside. Jim went to the living room. Jim got on the couch. The couch was a Pottery Barn sectional that Danny had ordered the week we bought the house, and which had arrived the day before the mortgage cleared. It was a beautiful couch. Dove gray, clean lines, clearly not designed with the possibility of a pygmy goat in mind. Jim was on the couch when Bethany came back on Friday morning. Bethany had come back on her own, without Carolyn, without Danny, without any plan whatsoever. Because, she told me later, she couldn't stop thinking about it, and she needed to understand what she had almost walked into. She found Jim on the couch, looking, she said, extremely settled. Bethany took a video of Jim on the couch. Bethany posted the video. The video had the caption, "The goat has claimed the sectional. I don't think I was the intended buyer anyway." The video got 2.3 million views. The comment that Bethany pinned, because she has excellent taste, was, "The goat had more right to that couch than any of the humans involved, and he knew it. I genuinely did not plan for the goat to be on the couch." Jim made that decision independently. He is a goat with opinions about soft furnishings, and I respect that about him, even though the couch cushion situation took some effort to address. My phone that weekend was not something I want to experience again. In 48 hours, I received 47 texts from numbers I didn't recognize, most of which were people who had seen the Reddit thread or the TikTok and wanted to tell me they were rooting for me. 19 texts from family members on both sides. 3 calls from Linda that I did not answer. And 1 call from my Aunt Renata, who had by Saturday morning reversed her position entirely and called specifically to say, "I watched it a second time, Andrew, and I owe you an apology, and I have removed myself from the group chat." Linda posted 3 more Facebook updates over the weekend. The first was vague and martyred. The second was also vague and martyred. The third was a Bible verse that I will not repeat here because I don't think it deserved the citation. Each post got fewer reactions than the last. The final one got 4, 2 of which were Renata hitting the angry face by accident and then not knowing how to undo it. Danny called me 9 more times between Friday and Sunday. I answered twice. The first call, I listened. She told me I was being unreasonable, that the house sale had been a business decision, that she'd been going to tell me that $50,000 was profit, that I wasn't thinking clearly. I didn't say very much. The second call, I told her she should contact a lawyer, that I'd be doing the same, and that the South Annex was remaining a farm parcel. Then I said goodbye. The thing that hit her hardest, and I know this because Bethany told me later, and Bethany has become surprisingly important to the story, was not the goats. It was not Rosie on the porch. It was not the sign, or the agricultural designation, or the TikTok, or Jim's opinions about sectionals. What hit her hardest was the family group chat. Because Danny had spent 18 months managing a narrative. That she was a city woman making brave sacrifices to build a life on the land. That she was patient and supportive. That I was, in a quiet way, not quite enough. The video destroyed that narrative completely and in a format that could not be unseen or undiscussed. And she knew it. She had structured everything on the assumption that I wouldn't find out until it was too late. The whole plan required my silence. And here's what she had not understood, what I think she fundamentally failed to understand about me, is that my silence was never permission. My silence was patience, and patience runs out. The phone call I did not see coming was from Marcus. My brother Marcus is 38 years old, and he has the personality of a man who was born irritated about something and has never fully recovered. He and I have a functional relationship built primarily on not talking about anything that matters, and occasionally fixing equipment together. He had met Danny twice before the wedding, said almost nothing, and attended the wedding with the expression of someone watching a procedure they've been told is routine but aren't fully convinced about. He called me Saturday afternoon. I answered because it was Marcus, and Marcus does not call unless he has something to say. I've been waiting 18 months to say this, he said. You are not a bank. You are a person. And she forgot the difference. I didn't say anything for a second. I should have said it sooner, he said. I didn't because it wasn't my place. And that was wrong of me. It wouldn't have helped, I said. No, he said. Probably not. But I should have said it anyway. Then he said, I called Linda. I said, Marcus. I was calm, he said. I was completely calm. I said 4 sentences. She hung up. She has not called again. I asked him what the 4 sentences were. He told me. I'm not going to repeat them here because 2 of them are not appropriate for a general audience, and 1 of them would require more explanation than I have time to give. But I will say this. They were accurate. They were specific. And Marcus delivered them, he told me, in a tone of voice so even and controlled that it was worse, he thought, than if he had shouted. I said, thank you, Marcus. He said, don't thank me yet. Earl is on the TikTok. He's got a fan club. I know, I said. He keeps calling me, Marcus said. He wants to know if the comments are real or if the internet is making fun of him. They're real, I said. That's what I told him, Marcus said. He cried a little. We talked for 40 minutes. It was the longest phone call Marcus and I have had in 10 years. Maybe ever. Bethany came back to the South Annex on Friday morning, and she called me in the afternoon. I want to tell you about Bethany because Bethany is important, and Bethany deserves to be understood as her own person, not just a piece of Danny's story, or Linda's story, or mine. Bethany Marsh was 29 years old, a physical therapist in Louisville, organized and careful and quietly funny in a way I didn't fully register until the 3rd conversation we had. She had no idea when she drove down to Mercer County that I existed. She had no idea that the house had been paid for by her cousin's husband. Danny had told her, I am not making this up, that the house was an inheritance from their grandmother's estate. A grandmother who, Bethany told me with a specific expression in her voice that I can only describe as nuclear disbelief, had been dead for 11 years and had left no estate to speak of, having spent her final years in assisted living in Elizabethtown. I bought it, Bethany said. I bought the story. I'm a terrible person. You're not a terrible person, I said. You were lied to. I drove 2 hours to buy a dead woman's house from a person who apparently didn't own it, she said. From a pig's porch. Rosie was just on the porch, I said. She didn't own it either. Bethany laughed. It was a good laugh, not that expensive room lighting kind. A real laugh. The kind you can't plan. She told me everything. She told me that Danny had been talking for months before the wedding about the farm plan. Bethany's words, the phrase Danny had used. The plan: marry the farmer, get the asset, liquidate, relocate to Nashville, invest in a condo, and build a life that looked the way Danny wanted it to look. I was, in the plan, the means by which the asset was acquired. I was not in the plan, the point. I want to tell you I was shocked by this. I don't know if I was, exactly. I think I had known something a long time in the way you know weather is coming without being able to point at any single cloud. But hearing it said plainly, having someone tell me that it had been a plan, a considered and structured plan that existed before I proposed, possibly before she said yes. That landed differently than anything else in this whole story. That was the moment I sat down. Not out of pain exactly, out of something that felt more like clarification. The fog lifting. I'm sorry, Bethany said. It's not your fault, I said. I know, she said. I'm still sorry. I asked her if she wanted to see the goat. She said she'd already met him. I said he had opinions. She said yes, she'd noticed, and that she'd sat on the couch next to him for 20 minutes before she left, and that Jim had, at some point, put his head on her knee, and that she had found it unexpectedly comforting. I said, He's a good goat. She said, he really is. I am not going to tell you this story ended with a beautiful resolution, because I respect you too much to do that. Danny and I are separated. We will almost certainly be divorced. The process has been what every person who has ever been through a divorce has described to me as a process, which is a word that does a lot of heavy lifting when what you mean is time consuming, expensive, and occasionally undignified. Danny's attorney sent a letter in month 2 of the proceedings that included, and I want to be precise here, a line item in the asset assessment that valued Rosie the pig as a marital asset to be divided. Rosie is a 190-pound Berkshire sow who has lived on my farm for 3 years and who was never, at any point, a marital asset. My attorney responded with a letter of 4 sentences. I did not read it before she sent it, but she told me afterward that the tone was appropriate. Linda has not called since Marcus's 4 sentences. She sent one text, 2 months later, to my number that said, "I hope you're doing well, hon." I stared at it for a long time. I did not respond. I chose, instead, to spend the energy I would have used on a response on walking the south field in the afternoon light, which is something I do sometimes when I need to remember what matters. The South Annex remains farm parcel number 4. Earl's son-in-law has expressed interest in renting the house, which I am considering, because Earl's son-in-law is a good person, and I think he would appreciate the porch. I do not know what Rosie will think about this arrangement, and I consider her opinion relevant. Marcus calls on Sundays now, not every Sunday, most Sundays. We don't talk about Danny. We talk about the farm, about his work. He manages a distribution warehouse in Frankfurt, about whatever Marcus has decided to be irritated about that week, which is a rotating and inexhaustible list. Last Sunday, he called to tell me that Earl's fan club on TikTok had now reached 14,000 followers, and that Earl had posted a video of himself feeding the goats, and it included a recipe for sweet tea at the end of it, and that the sweet tea video had gotten more views than the original post. I told him I was glad. I was genuinely glad. Earl is 62 years old and has worked 19 years on a farm in Mercer County, and he deserves 14,000 followers. He deserves more. Bethany and I have talked, I think, 6 or 7 times now. She drove down 2 months ago, and we walked the farm, the whole thing, all 280 acres, which is a considerable walk. And I showed her how the grain storage works, and she told me about her patients. And at some point, we walked past the South Annex, and she looked at the sign and said, "I still can't believe it." "Which part?" I asked. "All of it," she said. "The whole thing. The pig on the porch, the goat on the couch. The agricultural designation." "The designation was the important part," I said. "I know," she said. "But the pig really is what everybody talks about." She's not wrong. Rosie has her own section in the Reddit thread. She has fan art. Someone sent me a crocheted version of her, a 190-pound pig rendered in rust orange yarn with a little blue ribbon around her neck, which is now sitting on the windowsill of my kitchen, and which I find, unreasonably and honestly, a little touching every time I see it. Jim is fine. He's back with the main herd. He has not returned to the sectional. I believe he considers the matter settled. I've thought a lot about what I learned from all of this. I've turned it over in the way you turn difficult soil. Slowly, repeatedly, watching what comes up from underneath. And here's what I keep coming back to. Some people walk into your life carrying a blueprint they drew before they met you, that has your name in a box somewhere, that positions you as a resource inside a structure designed entirely around their outcome. And the thing about blueprints is that they work best when the material doesn't push back. They require you to be inert. They require you to stay where they've placed you and not notice what's being built around you. What I learned is this: I am not a resource. I am a person with land I love and dogs I love and a porch that I love and a brother who is irritating and loyal and a 62-year-old farmhand with 14,000 TikTok followers and a 190-pound Berkshire sow who, when the situation called for it, climbed onto a porch and sat there with the unshakable calm of someone who knew exactly where they belonged. Are we a perfect family? No. We never were. But Marcus calls on Sundays. Earl's fan club is growing. Bethany drove down to walk 280 acres and didn't complain once about the mud. The winter wheat on the South Annex is coming in slow and even and exactly the way I planted it. And Rosie is on the south field porch right now in the November light, looking like she always lived there. Maybe she did. Maybe some of us just take longer than others to find our way to the right porch. If you made it this far, thank you. Really. I'm just a farmer from Mercer County, Kentucky, and I never expected any of this. Drop a comment if Rosie deserved that porch. I think we all know the answer.